Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive?
Always. What are we looking at today?
Well, today we're going to try something a little different.
Oh.
Yeah, we're diving into a podcast episode.
Interesting.
About?
It's all about conversational English. You know, those phrases that can help you sound more natural and confident.
Uh-huh. I see. So like a little cheat sheet for better conversations.
Exactly. Think of it like we're extracting those golden nuggets that can really make a difference.
So what did they talk about?
One thing that caught my attention was about meeting new people. They suggested ditching the simple hi.
I can see why. Hi can be a bit, I don't know, flat.
Yeah, exactly. They recommended something more like, nice to meet you, what do you do?
I like that. Gets things moving, shows interest right off the bat.
Right. Instead of just exchanging names, you're immediately inviting the other person to share something about themselves.
And you know, most people love to talk about themselves, especially when someone shows genuine interest.
It makes them feel valued, right?
Yeah.
Like their experiences matter. Absolutely. It's like a subtle way of saying, hey, I'm curious about you.
It's setting a positive tone for the whole conversation.
Exactly. But there's another layer to this. When you ask, what do you do? You're also giving yourself a chance to learn something about them.
Yeah, you get some insights into their world, which can spark further conversation.
And that's what we want, right? To keep things flowing.
Speaking of keeping things flowing, that's something I personally struggle with sometimes. You know, knowing what to say next. What did they suggest for that?
Well, they talked about the power of open-ended questions.
Open-ended questions. You know, I've heard the term, but I'm not sure I could explain what it means.
It's really about encouraging more than just a yes or no answer.
Oh. So instead of asking, how was your weekend? Which might just get you a good...
Right. You could ask something like, did you do anything fun over the weekend?
I see. So it invites them to elaborate, share a bit more.
Exactly. And that can lead to all sorts of interesting tangents. You might discover shared interest, learn something new, who knows?
It feels less like an interrogation and more like a genuine exchange, right?
Absolutely. It's all about creating space for that back and forth, that natural flow.
I like that. So we've got the introduction down. We know how to keep things moving. But what about those awkward silences?
Ah, yes, those dreaded silences.
It happens to everyone, right? You suddenly can't think of a single thing to say.
It's that moment when the conversation hits a wall.
And you just want to fill it with anything, even if it's totally random.
But you know what? The podcast actually had a really interesting suggestion for those moments.
Oh, tell me.
They said to try reacting to your environment.
Reacting to your environment. I'm not sure I follow.
So let's say you're in a cafe, right?
Okay, I'm in a cafe.
You could say something like, wow, this cafe has such a cool vibe. Have you been here before?
I see. So you're shifting the focus away from that internal pressure to come up with something clever.
Exactly. You're creating a shared experience. Plus, their response might tell you something about their taste in cafes, whether they frequent the neighborhood, maybe even spark a memory.
And it feels so much more natural than trying to force a topic out of thin air.
It's about finding common ground in that shared moment.
I like that. It takes the pressure off.
Right. And, you know, there are other ways to handle those silences, which we can delve into later.
All right.
But for now, let's move on to another important aspect of conversation. Knowing how to end things gracefully.
Oh, yeah. That's another one I struggle with sometimes. You don't want to be rude, but sometimes you need to move on, right?
Absolutely. And that's where a well-chosen closing phrase can make all the difference.
Like what?
They suggested something like, hey, it was really nice talking to you. Let's catch up again soon.
Oh, okay. So it's not just saying goodbye. It's expressing that you genuinely enjoyed the conversation.
Right. And that little mention of catching up again, it keeps the door open for future interaction. It's a lot warmer than just abruptly saying, well, gotta go.
I see. It leaves a more positive impression.
But, you know, what if you don't actually want to catch up again?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes you have a pleasant chat, but you're not necessarily looking to build a relationship.
Right, and that's where things get interesting. It brings us to a really important idea, context. It's like you wouldn't wear, I don't know, a suit to a barbecue, right?
Right.
Same idea with conversations. You adapt to the situation.
So it's about recognizing those different situations. But how do you get better at that? Like, how do you read the room, as they say?
I think it comes down to observation. Pay attention to how people are interacting. What kind of language are they using? What's the overall tone?
Oh yeah, those subtle cues.
Exactly. And as you start to notice those things, you'll get a better feel for what's appropriate in different contexts.
You know, that reminds me of a time when I totally misjudged the context. I was at a meeting with a potential client, and I tried to use some slang term I'd heard in a movie.
Ooh, I bet that didn't go over well.
Let's just say it was a learning experience.
Well, we've all been there. The key is to be open to feedback, right?
Okay, so context is key. Let's go back to some of those phrases we were talking about. That opening line, "Nice to meet you, what do you do?" It sounds great, but are there times when it might not be the best fit?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like if you're at a party or a concert, something like that, focusing on someone's profession might feel a bit too formal, you know?
Yeah, you don't want to be grilling people about their careers when they're just trying to relax and enjoy the music.
Exactly. In those more casual settings, it's more about finding common ground in the shared experience. You could ask, have you seen this band before? Or what's your favorite song? Something like that.
Makes sense. You're matching the conversation to the overall vibe.
Right. Or if it's a really casual gathering, you could even try something playful, like, what brings you here today?
I like that. It's lighthearted, but still shows you're interested.
Exactly. Now, what about those open-ended questions? Are there any pitfalls to watch out for there?
Good question. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, one thing to be mindful of is the interrogation effect.
The interrogation effect.
Yeah, even though open-ended questions are great for getting people talking, you don't want to bombard them with a million questions in a row.
You need to give them space to breathe, right?
Exactly. A good conversation is a balance. It's about asking questions, but also sharing your own thoughts and experiences.
It's that back and forth, that give and take.
Right, and that's where active listening comes in.
Oh yeah, active listening is so important.
It's not just about waiting for your turn to speak. It's about really focusing on what the other person is saying. Their words, their tone, even their body language.
You're showing them that you're truly engaged.
Exactly.
Right.
Sometimes the best conversations happen when you let go of the need to control the flow, you know?
You just let it unfold naturally.
Right. Okay, so we've talked about reacting to the environment to handle awkward silences. But are there other strategies we can use?
Yeah, what else can we do when things go quiet?
Well, sometimes the simplest approach is the most effective. You can simply acknowledge the silence. Like, well, this is a comfortable silence, isn't it? Or, I guess we've covered all the important topics.
I like that. It breaks the tension.
Right. It injects a bit of humor. And if you're feeling really brave, you could even use the silence as an opportunity for self-disclosure.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
You could say something like, you know, I'm not always great at small talk, but I'm really enjoying this conversation.
Wow, that's putting yourself out there.
But you might be surprised how much people appreciate that kind of honesty. It can really deepen the connection.
So you're saying vulnerability can be a good thing?
I think so. It shows you're being real. Okay, now what about that closing phrase we discussed earlier, the "let's catch up again soon"? Are there times when that wouldn't be appropriate?
Yeah, I was wondering about that. Like, what if it's a very brief interaction?
Right, like if you're just ordering a coffee or asking for directions, that level of familiarity might feel a bit off.
It would be like, thanks for the latte. See you next Tuesday for a deep dive on the meaning of life.
Exactly. In those cases, a simple thanks, have a great day is perfectly fine.
It acknowledges the interaction without implying anything more.
Right. But if you've had a more substantial conversation and you genuinely want to stay in touch, that's where that closing phrase comes in handy.
It shows you're interested in building a relationship.
Exactly. But here's the thing. If you say, let's catch up again soon, you've gotta mean it. Don't just say it out of politeness.
Oh yeah, that's the worst. It's like saying we should hang out sometime and then never following through.
Right. If you genuinely want to connect again, be specific. Suggest grabbing coffee, exchange numbers, or mention a shared interest you could explore together.
So it's about taking that next step. Wow, this has been so insightful. I'm really learning a lot about how to navigate these everyday conversations.
It's been fun exploring these nuances with you. You know, the great thing about conversation is that it's a skill you can always improve.
So before we wrap up, let's recap those 4 key phrases from the podcast, just to remind everyone what we've covered.
Sounds good. So first we had, nice to meet you, what do you do?
Which can be great for professional settings, but maybe not always the best fit for more casual encounters.
Right. Next up was, did you do anything fun over the weekend? A classic open-ended question.
Perfect for keeping those conversations flowing.
And then we talked about, handling those awkward silences.
We had reacting to the environment, acknowledging the silence with humor, and even using it as a chance to be a little vulnerable.
Lots of options. And finally, we discussed ending conversations gracefully with, "Hey, it was really nice talking to you. Let's catch up again soon."
But only if we really mean it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so there you have it. 4 simple phrases that can make a big difference in your conversations.
But as we've discussed, it's not just about memorizing the words. It's about understanding the context, being yourself, and embracing those little imperfections that make conversations so interesting. You know, it's funny, we often get so caught up in trying to say the perfect thing, We overthink it.
I know, right? It's like we forget to actually be present in the conversation.
Yeah, we're so busy trying to avoid any awkwardness that we miss out on the flow.
Exactly. And that's when things start to feel forced,
Yeah.
unnatural.
It's like conversation's supposed to be a dance, not a rehearsed speech.
That's a great analogy. It's about finding that rhythm together.
So I guess if someone's listening and they really want to get better at conversations, what would you tell them? What's the one piece of advice?
That's a good question. I think I'd say approach every conversation with a sense of curiosity.
Curiosity.
Yeah, be curious about the other person, curious about what you might learn. See it as an opportunity to connect, to expand your own perspective.
I like that. It takes the pressure off,
It does, right? It allows you to just enjoy the experience.
Okay, so as we wrap up here, any final thoughts for our listeners?
Let me see. I guess I'd say pay attention to how people react to different approaches.
Oh, yeah, like what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. Notice what resonates with people, what creates that sense of ease and connection. It's like you're conducting your own little conversational experiments.
I love that. We're all scientists in the lab of human interaction.
That's a great way to put it. And the more you experiment, the more you'll learn what works for you.
This has been a fantastic deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new toolkit for better conversations.
It's been a pleasure diving into this with you.
And to all our listeners out there, thanks for joining us on another deep dive.
And remember, go out there and have some amazing conversations.